Hey, I got some exciting news. If you notice, my little nameplate thingy, if it's up there, has changed a little bit. I will be on the north side permanently from now on. So some of you guys will be excited. Some of you will be like, oh, man. But what that means is Richie will still be preaching down here a couple times a month. Shane and Brennan will be mixing in. But I will be here all the time to meet you at the door and give you a hug. So I'm excited about that. Richie and I were talking about it. Ooh, yes, we were. And he said, you want to be down there all the time? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, just don't get in a lot of trouble. So he left room for a little bit of trouble. So that's what we're going to do. Have any of you guys ever got to pick your own team? Any of you guys ever got to be in that place, right, where you get to pick your own team? Maybe for you it's at work, and the boss came and he's like, hey, we've got this new initiative and I want you to lead it. Maybe you are a freakish athlete. You were just phenomenal at everything sports-wise, or maybe you're good at guessing random numbers when people have the random number in their head and they're like, that guy gets to be the captain. Because of my incredible athletic ability, my ability to jump and run, I have got to pick a lot of teams by guessing numbers that people randomly put in their head. And I don't know about you, but a lot of times when I first started picking teams, when I was the one that could do that, I chose poorly a lot of times. I thought that the way that you picked a team was you go out and you find all the superstars. And if you get enough superstars together, people who are phenomenal, say it's a basketball, who are great at dribbling and shooting and all that stuff, that if you get 4 of those guys on a team and a guy like me, that you would win a whole bunch. Because my thought process is that's who wins games, right, is superstars. But man, I had a team once that I was on, and it was 4 guys who apparently could have gone pro if they hadn't blown out their knee, or you guys know those statements, right, where they're like, oh, if this hadn't happened, if it hadn't snowed, they could have gone pro or whatever it was. And I remember thinking, oh, we are still going to dominate this league. What I didn't anticipate is when you're on a team with 4 superstars and you never make meaningful contact with a basketball. I got to check it in, that was it. They were like, Mike, go check the ball in. I'm like, all right, here you go. And they're like, oh, that's it. And then we waited till it was out of bounds again. Now listen, there's nothing wrong with being a superstar. God has gifted some of us, and I would tell you, if God has made you great, be great to the glory of God. There is no problem with being a superstar. But what I have figured out is that sometimes, if we're a superstar and Jesus hasn't gotten a hold of us, we don't do a real good job of being teammates. What we end up doing is we try to raise ourselves up. We try to get a lot of glory for ourselves. We try to fill up the stats quite a bit. And so when I was first picking teams, I thought, well, I need people who can fill up the stat sheet. What I didn't realize is that doesn't lead to victory very often. What leads to victory is when you have people on your team who care more about the team and care more about winning than they do about themselves. And so what I realized later on in life is the way you pick oftentimes is you pick people who are hustlers, people who go, man, I'm going to work hard even if I'm not very good at this. People who put the team first, who say, because I don't think I'm all that impressive or all that important, I don't need you to know who I am. We just got to win this game, and I'll do anything it takes to win this game. What I think is absolutely incredible is this is how Jesus went through life picking people. He didn't pick the religious people that were superstars. If you think about it, those of you that know the Bible a little bit, right, we're a church made up of some people who know the Bible, some people who saw a Bible in a hotel once, right? That's been their only use of it, and so we have this great difference. And I would say this, man, Jesus picked people that you and I would never pick. Jesus picked people who the religious people had passed over. In that culture, the way it would work is if you had kind of religious ability, you would go be a rabbi, you would be one of these other type teachers, and if they looked at you and went, you're pretty normal, you're pretty ordinary, you went off and you did something else. When Jesus came, he didn't go to the synagogues and say, who's the smartest among you? He went out and found fishermen and tax collectors. He went out and found tailors and people that you and I would just go, really? Those are pretty normal people. And because Jesus picked those people, what was really cool was that nobody ever mistook those people as being the greatest people on the planet. Oftentimes what they would do is they would look at normal, ordinary people who God was using and they would go, God must be really good. Now, I know it's kind of a backhanded compliment, right? If someone's like, God used you, he must be awesome, right? But what they're saying is, you're a normal person. And if there's a gap there, and God can fill it, that brings glory to God's name. Those of us that follow Jesus, that's our desire, is to say, more people have to know about this God that absolutely loves us. And so Jesus would go around picking those types of people. The reason we're talking about this is we're in this series called Entrusted with Every Moment, where we're talking about the idea that what God's put inside of you, God wants to draw out of you for the sake of other people. And when we preach that, for the first couple of weeks, we're talking about it, and I bet you there's some of you in the room and you're shaking your head going, yeah, apprenticeship is a good idea. I probably should apprentice someone. I probably should be apprenticed under someone. And then we begin to disqualify ourselves. Yeah, but I don't know a lot about the Bible. So maybe I shouldn't be the one that's leading somebody else. Well, I'm not relationally as mature as I'd like to be. Maybe I need to wait. We have all these things that we think disqualify us, and we think, well, God won't use me until. We have people in the room who would say this: once I get my life right, then I'm going to accept Jesus. And the truth is, you don't wait until you're there to get there. You start where you are, and God comes in, and he does this mighty, mighty work. The people that God chose are the people a lot of times we wouldn't choose. And so there's a guy named Paul in the Bible. I think he's absolutely hilarious. So he was a religious elite guy. He was one of those guys that if you looked at, you would say he checked all the boxes. And he even said so. Like somebody was asking him one day about himself. He's like, oh, I was like the most religious dude ever. He said, I even killed other people for not being religious, which I don't know how that's religious, but that's how he measured religion, was his zeal. And then Jesus met this dude on a road one day. And I mean, just absolutely transformed the guy's life. And so he goes out and he starts talking to other people about Jesus. Now I'm going to read you a section I find really funny, because I'm not so sure that Paul understands what encouragement should sound like. But he's early in his ministry, and this is what he says as he's trying to encourage people. Brothers, think of what you were when you were called, right? So it starts out, it's not too bad. Not many of you were wise by human standards. That doesn't sound like encouragement. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. Listen, but God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. He chose the lowly things of this world and the things that are despised and the things that are not to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. It is because of Jesus that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, if it is written, let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. Now, the reason I find this funny is, can you imagine if somebody stood up here and went, hey, I want to encourage you guys today. You're the dumbest people that there's ever been, right? Like he starts out that way. He's like, you're lowly and you're despised and you're weak and you're not. And at first, it feels a little offensive. Well, Paul, why would you try to encourage me that way? And I would say this. I think the reason that Paul starts out that way is he wants you to realize something. All the things right now inside of you that you think disqualify you from being used by God are the very reasons that God is coming to fill your life. When you sit there and think, I don't know enough about the Bible, God's like, I would choose you because you know you don't know enough. Well, I don't know enough to lead. God would probably choose you because you're the right person to lead. It's oftentimes those people who think they deserve something who are the worst at it. Well, I should be leading this thing because I know better than anybody else. And he says, you know what? Until you're humbled, there's really not space for you. Oh, I know everything there is to know about the Bible. Have you ever noticed how the least enjoyable people to listen to talk about the Bible are the ones that think they know it the best? And the ones that say, I'm not really sure about this part, but I think this is what God's doing, that draws you in and it makes you go, oh, yeah, I really want to be a part of that. See, I think Paul's trying to encourage us with this idea that not a single one of us was chosen because we were a big deal. And this is what it means for you. Maybe you're someone and you come to church and you feel like you have a ton of questions. And so we start talking about things like apprenticing and mentoring and that kind of stuff. And you begin to go, but I have a lot of questions. I would say this, I think Jesus would pick you because you have a lot of questions. And if you have all the answers, he may have some things to do in your life. If you come and you go, look, I'm not a big deal. I don't have a lot of social influence. Like nobody listens to me. I would tell you, I think Jesus would probably pick you. Because you're not so full of yourself that you think everybody should listen to you. You're probably going to walk with some humility, and it's going to cause other people to lean into you. The people that I have seen that have made the biggest difference in life are not the ones you and I would go, they make great Christians, they should make great leaders. It's the people that we go, wow, Jesus got a hold of your life. That's absolutely incredible. See, there's some of you that are sitting in here, and as we talk about apprenticeship, you think we're talking about somebody else. And we're actually talking about you. And you go, what about this gaping hole? That hole is just big enough for Jesus. And they won't mistake him for you. And so those holes you bring actually make room for God to do this incredible thing. And so here's the thing we're going to be talking about today is we need to find people the same way that Jesus found people. We need to pick our team the same way. I would say this, when you walk in humility, it causes you to be the exact kind of person Jesus wants you to be. I grew up with a disease, and some of you guys know that I had this disease growing up. It's called little man's disease. And you're born with a mouth that's bigger than your body. And it goes off all the time. And other dudes are more than welcome to help you with therapy over the course of your lifetime to help correct that disease that you have. And so I remember when I first started taking martial arts, because I had suffered through that for many, many years, I was an incredible student. Because here's the deal. I used to get in fights all the time. I know that's hard to believe. You guys are like, but you're so not opinionated and sweet and gentle. But for some reason, I was always getting in fights, and they would win some, and I would almost win others. And so when I first started taking martial arts, man, I was a sponge. That guy was like, you put your foot over here and you punch here and you do this and you do that. I was a student because I knew the gaping holes in my life. We'd have other guys that came in. I was up in northern Japan working in a military base, and we'd have Marines come in, and we would have some Army guys come in. We'd have all these other guys come in, and a lot of these guys, man, they were coming in with a toughness. They had never lost a fight. They'd always won. They were bigger, they were faster, they were stronger. And can I tell you that most of those guys washed out of our class within a week? Because they didn't know their weaknesses and they were trying to live just in their strength, there wasn't really a lot of room for them to learn. If you come in today and you go, man, I feel like I've got weaknesses all through my life. I don't feel like I'm moral enough to come to Jesus. You were in the right spot to come to Jesus. Man, I don't think I know enough to apprentice somebody else. Then you know enough to apprentice somebody else. Well, I don't know if I know enough to lead. Then you know enough to lead right where you're at, man. God is going to fill you up. He's going to clear that space. He's going to be inside of it, and you're going to see him revealed like crazy. The passage that we're going to be in is in Acts chapter 4. I'm going to tell you just a little bit of history around the Bible because I know that some of us don't know a lot about it. If you get to the New Testament, that's the part that deals with Jesus and the people that come after Jesus. The first 4 books in there are called the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And gospel means good news. It's the good news about Jesus' life and his teaching and his death and his burial and his resurrection. I tell you what, if you've never read it, it is an incredible, incredible place to figure out who God is and how he sees you. And you're going to see grace and mercy and power, and it is awesome, right? The book that comes after that is a book called Acts. The way that I look at Acts is like the baby book of the church. It kind of explains what Christianity looked like after Jesus left to go back to be with God. The reason I think that's so important is because nowadays I hear people say things like, well, I know Jesus said this is what I think Jesus meant. The book of Acts actually shows us exactly what Jesus meant, because the people who heard Jesus then went out and said, this is what he meant. For instance, when Jesus said, hey, listen, you need to go out and baptize people. Well, when the early disciples go out and baptize people, instead of us saying, well, what do I think that means? We just look at what they did, and we say, you know what? What Jesus did is defined by what the early disciples did. So it's this incredible book to actually teach us about Jesus and the things that he said. So it starts out, and Jesus had said this to his followers. He said, listen, I'm getting ready to go back to the Father. I'm going back to heaven. I'm going to send a gift. You need to wait in Jerusalem, and I'm going to send a gift to you, and when he comes on you, then I just want you to do what he tells you to do. So there's about 120 of them. They're hanging out, doing church kind of service. You know, they're like, man, we don't know what's going to go on next. We don't know if they're going to arrest us. We're not sure what happens. So God sends his Spirit to live inside of people, and it's crazy. I mean, they start speaking in different languages. They have this boldness and courage that rise up, but it's just normal dudes. It's not preachers and teachers and those kinds of people. These are fishermen. These are tax collectors and CPAs and, tradesmen. And so they stand up and they just start preaching. And all of them are just like, man, here we go. We're just going to start telling people about Jesus. And it says this. It says that in that day, 3,000 people were baptized into Christ. You know what I love about the story? It wasn't because any of them were good preachers. It wasn't because they went, oh, we just had the perfect church service. And it all came together and they played Just As I Am at the right time. And all those people ran up and they were... wasn't none of that. You know what it was? Normal people who had been changed by Jesus, that were letting Jesus speak through them, caused that. And then these normal guys, these fishermen, that sometimes I think we make heroes, they would have been the people sitting next to you in church right now. You would not have turned to them and been like, oh, that's him. You'd have been like, that's him, right? Like that's how this would have been. They start going out, and because who God is, man, they're healing people and raising people up. And it says in no time that there's 5,000 people that are following Jesus. Now, I don't know about you. I would love that. I would love to be a part of seeing God do something like that, right? And so a lot of times as I'm reading that, I'm trying to figure out the secret sauce. What is it that caused all those people to come to know Jesus so quickly? Because I want to be a part of that. But then eventually, because they won't stop preaching, the religious people, they come and they grab a couple of these guys and they draw them in. And they said, hey, y'all need to knock it off. You're filling Jerusalem with this teaching, right? Normal people filling Jerusalem with the teaching. Not a church, not a preacher, not some guy that's gifted, not some lady that's gifted. Normal, everyday people that just talk about Jesus are filling Jerusalem with this teaching. And then it says this, and I think it's absolutely incredible. When they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And they took note that these men had been with Jesus. See, I think that's the secret sauce. I'm looking there going, hey, tell me what they preached, because maybe I'll preach that. Well, tell me about this speaking in different languages thing. Like, what was that about? Tell me about healing and prophecy. And all those things are good, right? But like, I can get lost in those things. You know what it was that they took note was? They have courage, they're ordinary, and they've been with Jesus. Well, man, let me ask you this. Can you have courage? Everyone in this room can have courage. Well, do you feel ordinary? Probably most of us would say, I feel ordinary or maybe a little less than ordinary. Okay, you fit that category. Can you spend time with Jesus? Well, yeah, like all of us have that ability. Do you know that that's what they took note of? Is those three things. And that's what we're going to push in today, is just real quick, those three things. The first one is Jesus looks for people with courage, and we're going to look for people with courage. Blows me away to think about this. Who stands up and says, I won't stop talking even when the government says, shut up, sit down, or we're going to take everything you have? The early disciples did. Rome came in and said, if you guys don't knock it off, we're going to take everything that you have. Now, I'm not saying they went out and picked a fight with the government. I'm saying this. They figured out what Jesus cared about, and they did it, and they didn't care enough to stop just because stuff was going to be taken from them. We're going to take your homes, we're going to take your cars, we're going to take your camels, we're going to take whatever it was you got, we're taking it from you. And they went, oh, you can have it all anyway. It's not mine, and one day I'm not going to be here. I'm going to be with my Father. And who stands up when religious people start threatening to kick you out? Who stands up when they say, listen, if you don't play by our rules, then we're not going to call you a good Christian. Then you can't come here. I would say the early disciples did. They exercised enough courage to say, I don't care what religious people say. I'm going to do what Jesus said. Man, who in the world, when the mob is standing there and they're like, listen, you either agree with us or we're going to throw rocks at you until you're dead, says, well, start throwing, man. Like, I can't not say the things that are true. Here's what I want you to know. To be somebody that changes the world, sometimes all you need is a little bit of courage. And courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. Courage doesn't mean, as a matter of fact, I would say this, if you're scared to death, you're right at the step before courage is necessary. Courage isn't one of those things where you go in and go, you know what, I don't care what they take from me. It's like, oh my goodness, I don't know what they're going to take from me, but Jesus is bigger than my fear, right? That's what courage is. Do you know that that's who God is looking for? God's looking for you. If you were terrified right now, when we talk about apprenticing, if you're like, oh man, I don't want to apprentice someone, I'm scared to death I'll get it wrong, you're probably right where Jesus wants you. If you're sitting there going, oh my goodness, like I'm going to go ask somebody if I can mentor them, and they're going to look at me like I'm weird, and they're going to say, well, what makes you think? And you're going to have all this stuff. If you're terrified, man, you're right in the place Jesus wants you. Because people of great courage, when you do that, it causes other people to stop and go, why would you do that? Right? That is not what a normal person does. Normal people don't go up to other people and say, can I teach you how to do life? You would look at that person and be like, no, you can't. No, you can't have nothing to do with teaching me nothing. But a godly person who knows what God is up to, who says, listen, can I help you in your marriage? Can I teach you how to be a better businessman, businesswoman? Man, can I show you how to be a dad? Not because I'm perfect, but Jesus has done something in my life, and I'm standing here, and you're standing there, and if you'll do this, here's my promise to you. I'm going to go learn from somebody else how to do this as well. And then you cause this chain reaction where Jesus starts doing all the different things he wants to do. Why? Because you took one step of courage, because you stepped out and said, you know what, I'll do the thing that Jesus is asking me to do. The second part in here that I love, it says that Jesus was looking for ordinary people. Now, we don't oftentimes talk about the original language here, but I got to tell you about the original language in here because it is so cool. The two words are agrammatoi and idiote, right? Agrammatoi means this. It means you're unschooled. You're not trained. Another way of saying it is you're illiterate. Have you ever felt spiritually illiterate? You ever feel like, man, I don't know. I don't know how to stop sinning. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Do you know if you've ever felt that way, you're exactly who Jesus would have picked? And this idiotes, it actually is where we get our word idiot. And I know church people, we don't use that word, but the Bible used that word. And it just means this, common and ordinary. It means if you've ever thought, well, who am I? You're the right person. Yeah, but and then you fill in the blank. Well, I've been divorced. Well, I used to be an addict. Well, I've had an anger issue. Well, I was apathetic. Well, I went to church and then I quit going to church, so who am I to start following Jesus again? If you've ever felt that way, you're exactly who Jesus would pick. The way that the translation kind of says it, if you read it, is if you've ever felt like an illiterate idiot when it comes to faith, you're exactly who Jesus is looking for. And you know what we do? We feel like that and we think that should drive me away from a good God. A good God looks for people who feel common, ordinary, and not up to the task. That's who God's always been after. I was thinking back through, I was like, well, can I see examples of that in the life of Jesus? And I would tell you all through the life of Jesus. Some of you know the Bible. You'll remember stories like this. There was a guy who was crippled. He was crippled from birth, couldn't walk. And Jesus went and healed him. And then Jesus said, now, basically, I want you to go tell other people about me. You know what Jesus didn't do? Jesus didn't sit down and train him. Jesus didn't sit down and say, we got a 16-week Bible study. There's some reading, right? There's some Bible memory verses you're going to have to get down because you know what he did? He just said, hey, just tell people that God loves you and this is what he did for you. There was a woman who was at a well. She had had 5 husbands, and the man she was living with was not her husband. And she knew that's not God's design, right? She knew that. She was trying to hide it from Jesus. Jesus met with her and talked with her. Jesus revealed to her, look, I know who you are. And he's like, and I love you. I mean, that's something, I don't know if you know that about God. He knows who you are. And he absolutely loves you. And so she runs back into the city, and she says, I just met a guy, and he told me everything about myself. You got to come meet him. You know what she didn't know? She didn't know all the different parts of theology and doctrine. She didn't know the Old Testament and the New Testament. She didn't know what all those church words meant. She knew this. I was over here lost and hiding, and when Jesus shined a light on me, it wasn't to crucify me. It was to tell me I could have a life again. There was a blind dude, and he'd been blind since birth, and Jesus came along and gave him his sight, and the religious leaders were freaking out because they're like, okay, how did that happen? Generally, that only happens at the hand of God, but they didn't want Jesus to be that guy, and so they start badgering him. Well, what do you know about this, and what do you know about that? And they start asking him all kinds of religious questions. Well, how does this work? How does that work? Is this okay? Is that not okay? Some Christians say this, some Christians say that. Guy has the best answer in the Bible. He's like, I don't know. He said, here's what I know. I was blind, and now I see. And he says, because of that, I follow Jesus. And then he says this, you want to follow Jesus too? He made them all mad, man. They were so angry at him, and they're like, get out of here, Listen, what does Jesus want from you? Well, just for you to say how much you already know, for you to be ordinary, for you to be unique. Why? Because those of you that are ordinary and in those places, guess what? When you're ordinary at work and Jesus changes your life, your people at work know that. Right? They look into your life and go, but you were just like me. You used to have a temper problem. You used to have a drinking problem. You used to have a whatever problem. And they're like, but you're different now. I don't get it. Why are you different now? And they see Jesus inside of you. There was a woman caught in the act of adultery. Like the way the Bible writes it is caught in the act, and they drug her out on the street in front of everybody. Imagine the shame. And they pulled her right in front of Jesus, and they all pick up rocks to get ready to stone her. And they're like, Jesus, you're moral, right? You're holy, you're all this. What are we going to do about her? Jesus he writes something in the ground. I don't even know what he wrote. But next thing you know, they start dropping their rocks, and they walk off, and Jesus looks right at her, and he said, is everybody here to condemn you? And she's like, no, they all left. And so she's waiting for him to say, okay, now I'm going to give it to you. You know what Jesus says to her? He says, I don't condemn you either. He said, but you got to quit sinning. He says, you got to leave your life as sin. Listen, here's what I want you to hear. You don't have to know a ton of things to honor Jesus. You don't have to know a ton of things to apprentice. You don't have to know a ton of things to be a mentor. You don't have to know a ton of things to disciple someone the way Jesus told you to disciple someone. You know what you have to do? You have to be you and acknowledge that you're you and make a ton of room for Jesus. And when you do that, God shines through in some of the most brilliant and beautiful ways. And this last one for you. And Jesus looked for people who were willing to spend time with him and that had an impact on him. We look for people willing to spend the kind of time with Jesus that has an impact on him. Here, I want to talk to church people at this point. So if you're not a church people, then you can just kind of listen in on the church people part, get in there, rear end shoot for a second. All right, this is what I want to say to you if you're a church person. It's not enough to open your Bible. If that Bible doesn't cut you open, you may be wasting your time. It is not enough to have a prayer time if you're not going to listen to Jesus while you're praying. It is not enough to come to church if you think, well, I checked my box and now I can go home. I would say it to you this way. Why in the world would you open up a living letter from your Creator and not let it change you? Why would you pray and not listen to the God who wants to tell you what he wants you to know about yourself and what comes next for you? Why would you come to church and just go through the motions and say we got to get in and get out and get on with our day when the Creator of the universe is saying, because you're here together, I'll be here with you and I'll do things and say things that will change you forever. Man, it's about spending the kind of time with Jesus that changes you, that has an impact on you. Let me tell you a story as I get ready to kind of draw this to a close. Some of you guys have heard one of my heroes in life was my dad, my stepdad. He actually raised me since I was 2.5. His name was Richard Petrosino. About 5'8", 5'9", 260-pound Italian dude, Vietnam vet. So I was born in 72. He quit fighting in Vietnam, I think in 71. And so by the time he married my mom, it was 1975. I was about 3 years old. And man, he was a wreck. He had met Jesus at some point in his life, but it hadn't really had an impact. You ever meet someone, or you ever been in that place in life where you're like, yeah, I've said yes to Jesus, but it's not really changing me yet? That's where my dad was at. And he was like a lot of combat vets. If you're a combat vet, or if you're married to one or have one in your family, combat does damage to a soul, right? Like that you can't see on the outside. The things that combat vets sacrifice are so internal. I mean, it's part of their who they are. And so he came back, and he hadn't sorted through that stuff, man, and he was angry. I can remember as a little kid, he was never violent with us, but he would lose his temper. And he and my mom would get into these arguing matches. They would be cussing at each other. And about every 3 or 4 months, they would, I'm going to divorce you, and I'm going to divorce you, and we're going to leave each other. And if you've ever been in a broken home like that, man, it is hard. And I remember as a little kid, my brothers and my sister and I, we would negotiate with them. No, please don't fight. Please don't say that about each other. Please don't get a divorce, right? Like, that's the position your kids are in when you fight like that. You got to know your kids love you so much, you put them in this position where they feel like they've got to counsel you. And I remember this was just who my dad was. I remember once I got in a fight with this kid, and I ran in the house. And he's like, what are you doing in here? And I said, well, that big old kid out there, I mouthed off to him, he wants to fight. And this was before Jesus got a hold of him. He's like, well, get out there and fight him. And I'm like, he's like 100 pounds heavier. And he's like, well, you better swing hard, son. So, I mean, that's like, this was before Jesus. But then, man, I would tell you this, in his late 30s, he started letting Jesus impact him. And he was still reading just like he had been reading, but now it was like he was letting the Bible read him as he read it. Man, when he was praying, he was actually listening and not just doing something religious. When he was showing up at church, man, he was actually trying to engage God. He was trying to engage different people. I want to tell you, man, up until the day that he died, he became one of the most godly men I've ever met in my life. But that was not who he was after war. It's because he had spent the kind of time with Jesus that changed him. Man, you would meet this dude, and you would see him, and you'd think, oh my goodness, what is he going to do? And he would reach out and grab you and give you a hug that felt like it was from your Creator. Make you feel like $1 million, man. And he had people lined up to talk to him constantly. Hey, this is where I'm at. What do you think Jesus would say? And he's like, man, I don't know, but let's go study the Bible together and figure it out together. At his death, when my mom and dad died, within a week, we had 8 different people come to us that we had never met that said, hey, your dad followed Jesus, and I could see it in him. I need to follow Jesus. And we baptized 8 people during a grieving week because of this man's life. I want you to know something, man. If you will spend the kind of time with Jesus that changes you and leaves a mark, other people will notice it. I love this story, right? Because it says that these ordinary people filled Jerusalem with the good news. And I look out, and I'll be honest with you, I'm not someone that just says stuff to make you feel good. This room, man, we could fill Spokane with the good news about Jesus. Like, we could do it, not because there's anyone in here that's like, man, you're really, really good, right? Your preachers are not really, really good. Your staff is not really, really good. We're pretty ordinary people who deeply love Jesus. Your elders, as good and godly men as they are, you're not going to find them and go, that's the best elder ever. You know what you're going to find? Men with courage, men who know that they're normal and ordinary, who spend enough time with Jesus to let him make an impact. And church, I want to call you to that. As we talk about apprenticeship, my challenge for you is to stop thinking about it and start doing it. It's to say, this week, I'm going to have enough courage to find someone and teach them. There's some of you, you're business owners, and you follow Jesus, and there's young men and young women, they need you to apprentice them. They don't need some preacher telling them how to do their life. They need you to stand up and say, this is how I follow Jesus. Can I teach you how to do that? While you follow somebody else who's teaching them. Some of you ladies, man, you are killing it at life, killing it at chasing Jesus. You need to grab some of these other young ladies, and you need to say, listen, I'm going to show you how to get to where I am because somebody else is showing me how to take the next step. I want to challenge you and encourage you to do a couple things this week. One of them is to actually spend time with Jesus that changes you. Maybe it's what you've already been doing, just do it like it matters and watch what God does. And then to actually have the courage this week to have a conversation that says, would you apprentice me? And to find one person to say, would you follow me? And see what God does. Some of you, though, to be very, very honest, you're not even there yet. You go, man, I don't even follow Jesus, man. And I don't want to ask you to go find somebody and say, hey, listen, can you teach me how to be a better Christian? Because you don't know Jesus yet. You need to let Jesus apprentice you. Maybe you grab somebody else to say, hey, help me figure out how to follow Jesus. But listen, if you feel like you're not worthy of saying yes to Jesus, you're right in the spot that Jesus wants to meet you. And today, in just a second, we're going to stand. Here's my challenge to you. You have the courage today to say, Jesus, I want you to fill my life. Head to the back, and we've got people back there that will talk to you about baptism. It's something that Jesus did, something that Jesus called us to do. He said, this fulfills all righteousness. I want you to do it. So if you're here and you go, I feel like I've got all this junk in my life to work out. Perfect. Man, work it out with Jesus today. Say yes and let us baptize you into Christ. We'll celebrate with you. And then as a church, here's a commitment that we'll make to you. We'll apprentice you. We'll teach you how to say yes to Jesus. We'll teach you how to say no to sin. We'll walk with you. And not because we got it figured out, but because we've been there before and some of us still are. But I tell you what, if you'll walk with us, we'll walk with Jesus and we'll get there together. I want to ask you to do this. If you would go ahead and stand with me. I wrote this down because I want you to hear it. Ordinary people who spend time with Jesus and exercise just a little bit of courage are just the kinds of people that God wants to use to fill Spokane with the good news. Man, if you don't feel like much, you're exactly who God's looking for. We're going to sing a song in just a second. And as we sing it, it talks about God's part first, man. And it says this is what God's going to do. And there's nothing that would stop God from coming to get you. But towards the end, there's this really cool part that tells you who you are. You're a son of God. You're a daughter of God. And that's how he sees you. And I hope you believe that today. I'm going to pray over you. If you're getting baptized, you can head to the back. Dave's back there. We'll talk with you. We'll baptize you before you leave today. For the rest of you, I ask you to do more than just sing a song. Worship this morning. Let it impact you, man. When you walk out of here, make sure somebody else sees that this time that's coming up left a mark in your soul. God, I thank you so much for who you are. I love that you pick those of us that feel illiterate and ordinary and abnormal and like, well, but God, I've done all this stuff. I wouldn't have got in if you had to be a hero. I wouldn't have gone in if you had to be a superstar. But God, your grace and your mercy is so big that you find all of us, every one of us. And not only do you welcome us in, but you say, you are exactly who I was looking for. Yeah, but God, I've got all this brokenness in my life. I know, watch what I do. Watch what I do. God, I pray that the people in this room would not just listen to this and think it's for somebody else, but they would believe that you are the God that looks at their life and says, I want you. I love you so much. I would do anything for you. And God, I pray that it's out of that place that we leave these doors. That God, we go into Spokane saying, look at me. I'm not much, but I serve a great and mighty King. And that God, you would receive the glory and you would receive the honor. And other people who fear far, far away, God would realize that if we can come home, they could too. And that God, a lot more people would come home because we are ordinary, but you are awesome. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. If you're going to be baptized.